All right, so today's video we're going to be reacting to the dev interview that happened yesterday. I did watch it live, but I wanted to give a little bit more of my insight and my thoughts. Gives me a little bit more time to kind of like pause and play the react. I felt like the last react we did was a little bit like I just tried to talk during their conversation, which wasn't the best. So let me know what you think about this. Obviously, we're doing this off stream, so a little bit different. You want to see the chat? I've been obviously doing more of this off stream recordings. Let me know what you think about that too. Here we go. So for anybody wondering, this is the dev interview yesterday with Flats, SVB, Aaron Keller, and Alec Dawson. They'll introduce themselves at the beginning here. So and they talk about a bunch of variety of subjects, 6v6, what their vision of Overwatch is. They talk a little bit about competition with other games, amongst a bunch of other various subjects. So here we go.
All right, let's do it then. Welcome, everyone, for a very special episode of the Group Up podcast. We are here for what I'm calling the Great Dev Interview. No debates today. We figured it would be a bit more peaceful today. And yeah, it's going to be very exciting. Because as many of you know, there's been a blog recently dropped by Game
very
Keller,
very good blog, if you haven't read it.
6v6 and the hot button issue, and then talking about the history of Overwatch. And we thought, well, who better to talk about that than the man himself? So we've got some friends. Let me introduce my panel. First, co-hosting with me is Flats. Flats, what's up?
Hello.
How you doing? You excited about this one?
Yep.
Oh yeah, I'm actually, you were the one who put our questions together, and I can't believe you're having me lead off with this one. I can't wait.
Yeah. So we're gonna get interesting. We're gonna get interesting. We're gonna be discussing. Actually, you know what? First, let me continue to introduce. In the top left, we have with the lovely Juno background. Unfortunately, in this overlay, it's Juno's head is.
Keep in mind the overlay's a little bit off because I'm watching it from Flat's point of view.
Lead hero designer Alec Dawson. Alec, how you doing?
Hey everybody, excited to be here today. I've watched basically every podcast since Overwatch 2 came out, so I'll be excited to be on here for the first time.
Thank you. Well, I apologize for anything you had to hear.
So Alec's always, it's just a little side note here. Alec's always done a really, really good job. I've done a couple interviews with Alec in the past. I've spent it quite a bit, but since I did my last one, but Alec has always been good at answering questions. And I actually do think that even though SVB said Alec is the lead hero designer, I actually think Alec's responsibilities there now has gotten even more. And I can be corrected if I'm wrong here, but you'll kind of notice throughout the interview that Alec actually answers a lot more in-depth questions about like where the game is going past what you would get with lead hero designers. So my understanding is Alec actually is getting a lot more now in comparison to like just lead hero designer. So I don't know if that title has shifted since then, but just a little side note to that.
Apologize for the time length and whatever you had to hear about us criticizing your work, but hey, I appreciate you coming through anyways.
I mean, that's a part of the game. You got to hear both the positives and the negatives.
The man himself here to discuss his blog and many other big picture questions. Aaron Keller, game director of Overwatch. Aaron, how you doing?
Doing pretty good. I'm a little bit nervous, like I've seen this. I haven't watched every one of these. Not like Alec, but I've seen a decent amount of them. And what's funny is the one that I think I remember the most was a year ago, and it was the great 6v6 debate.
Very fitting for this one.
I think that was a whole year ago, this month, so it's like only fitting, right, that we come back here and kind of like continue it.
Man, we're gonna start hard and heavy here, I guess. But I think it's kind of the elephant in the room, and I've really wanted to talk about it for a long time. And Overwatch does not have the best reputation among the greater gaming community. Obviously there's the whole Steam thing and whatnot, and just post Overwatch 2 and all that kind of, or post PvE Overwatch 2, all that stuff. So what would you do? What do you want to do to maybe move past that and maybe begin to repair the lost trust within the game and the community?
Before Aaron gets into like this answer, because I think Aaron leads off here, I do want to point out Flats has been trying to get this question asked for a while, and usually it kind of gets like, basically the way that these interviews work is you do come with prepared questions. A lot of it just so you know what not to ask. It's generally, they allow for a lot of stuff, just to kind of give you like a little bit of background on that one. They're not usually like limited to it in a sense. It's more like, we're not going to talk about this direct discussion, and this is a question that Flats actually wanted in his previous Aaron interview, but it was a question that was actually not, they just said no to it. And it's funny because Aaron later in the interview talks about that and says that like this is why they did that, and it's a pretty cool explanation. He kind of explains like he couldn't have answered it as well. You'll see what I'm talking about later, but yeah, I know Flats was super excited to finally get this question going because like, it came down to like, he's been wanting to ask it for a while, and then basically sort of asking the devs like, hey, you've seen the reputation of your game, like what do you think, what can you do, is a good question to ask. It's That's why they kind of left off with they started off with the hard-hitting one.
Here we go. This is like, I see how this is gonna go now, you know.
No fluff questions here. No fluff questions here.
Yeah, exactly. This is a great question, you know. I guess I would start by, you know, agreeing with you, you know. So there is I think that there is a reputation that we have, at least like I think maybe in the broader gaming space, and I don't want to push back on that. I don't think I want to I don't need to go back too much into the history. Like I obviously have a history, like I have a habit of doing that myself if you've read the blog piece, right? But you know, like I think that the community has some valid things that they can point at for Overwatch, you know, and for Overwatch 2. And so I think that it is much easier to lose trust than to build trust, right?
Yes.
And we've had a saying that we used to talk about it. I think a little bit more on the Overwatch team is you're only as good as your last release, you know. And so you could be just like, you know, just knocking it out of the park, you know, patch after patch after patch, and if you get a bad one, people don't give you a whole lot of credit for it, you know. And I'm obviously not our reputation just isn't just based off of, you know, good or bad patches, but like
I do want to like point one thing out about that is like what Aaron's kind of saying here is that you can't, and maybe it's something they're starting to realize because Overwatch just kind of fell into this issue where it almost feels like they have a filler season almost every other season, right? Because it's, you know, a lot of the bread and butter has been like heroes, but like season 9, which was a non-filler season, was probably an eye-opener for them in the sense that like, okay, we don't need to rely on heroes and we don't need to do filler seasons. So people get a little bit disappointed in seasons when like it becomes an apparent filler. Actually, as we're talking about this, season 11's probably been their most filler season in a long time. What I mean by filler is it lacks a little bit of the content that you would normally want to see, or like major like polarizing changes that get people excited. And I think that's like something that I hope going forward. And it very much sounds like in recent interviews, like they want to do that going forward now, where they recognize that like they can't just kind of sit back with like these very much filler-based seasons that are based purely off of like cosmetics or like really small events, or even like big events, right? Like they recognize that there needs to be more substance to what they're doing. And this has been a very interesting season for that because this season has been a little bit less of that substance. If you haven't noticed, they did their mid-season patch really early, and since then it's been very quiet. Obviously leading into season 12, they're very excited about that, but they need to be more consistent with that because these are the months where like players will start to play it less. And in order to get those players back, in reference to them mentioning about trust, they need to come back with like a bang, like something huge, right? So when you have your filler season, you need to back that up with another amazing season. But I think it's going to be a little bit better if they can just consistently give you those good seasons so they don't have to rely on a huge banger if they don't need to. And give people more substance in each of the seasons that are considered filler, which we currently are in a filler season. So anyway, a little side note, Aaron will answer more here. I just want to kind of like get my thoughts across as we go.
I think to move forward here, it requires us to have like a pretty solid vision for what the game ought to be going forward, you know. And I think we talked about it a little bit at BlizzCon. And I think we can talk about it a little bit more today, you know, like what the vision of the game is going forward. And it's us like really pursuing that, but then at the same time like having as much consistent and transparent communication with our community as we can. So I think that for us, it's a more of a long-term strategy of continue to make the game that that vision of the game for Overwatch better, you know, and to continually grow it and make it, you know, more of that game that all of our players want to play, and then getting in front of our players like we're doing today, like we've done in a lot of our blog pieces, and just talking about it.
Yeah, it's about following through, you know, say what we're doing, actually on that. I think Aaron talked about.
I do want to give credit to Alec on this one. Alec is if I'm correct on Alec joined the team right at the beginning of Overwatch 2. And I love Alec's statement of like, we need to follow through with things that we are actually talking about. And that might be a little bit of a reference to PvE. Keep in mind, Alec joined well past when that those type of decisions were probably starting to like shift, right? So I love Alec just kind of coming in, like just going, you know what? We need to make sure we follow through with the things that we talk about and do. And that sometimes they've done that too. Like, I think an example of that could be like a Reaper rework. Like, you know how like you heard about that for a while, and then like it's been such a long time since they talked about some of these reworks that like you look at that and you go, that was something they talked about. That was something they talked about a long time ago, and then still to this day we don't have that. So it's really just kind of bringing up. He's kind of bringing up the idea that like they need to, like when they talk about stuff, actually do it, because that's going to cause some frustration. And we've seen that. Or they're like, their reworks take longer. So like they just need to get better at properly communicating how long it will take. Because I don't want them to be afraid of bringing up things they want to try or that they're doing, but maybe they can get a better understanding of the timetables and kind of put it more in like the mindset of like, we're going to do this, but this could be a year from now. This could be 6 months from now, and this is why. And I think that would be a little bit, people would understand that a little bit more. I mean, there's going to be some people who will still complain about that no matter what. That just kind of happens just about anything. But I think that approach could be a little bit better.
About it a little bit, but being more clear about the game we're making, and then seeing that being realized within the game itself with the release of features and, you know, how we go about balance as well. And then finally surprising our players with things that they don't even expect. I think that's really important for us to...
Little side note, things that people don't expect, and that is a huge thing, because I really do think that, I've talked about it before, and you might hear me mention it multiple times, people want an excuse to play Overwatch. They want to play the game, but you need to give them those reasons. So when players go on those breaks, and I talk about it all the time, and actually Aaron alludes to it later on, I call them hype cycles, and I'll get more into that later on. But like when you have a free-to-play game, in a world where there's a bunch of free-to-play games, you need to have polarizing content that make people want to come back and try it. And sometimes the unexpected things, right? Not talking about like a Transformers collab, which was cool, right? It looked really cool, etc. But like something surprising, something that like you hear about and you go, wait a second, that's going to be an Overwatch? I want to go try that. And I think that right there is a really good point by Alec, and I hope that they have the things in the future planned for that, because I think that could lead to really good things for Overwatch.
Take big swings later on in Overwatch to show you like where the vision's going in the next few years too.
I like that.
I think a lot of it is like currently we look at the game and we understand that players think there's really great content coming out. I mean, I'm so excited for Juno, obviously at the background, but
Juno's cool.
It can't just be the cadence of here release, and maps and continue that for a number of years. It has to be some other stuff too.
Yep, I agree.
What do you think? Like, either one of you.
Aaron, it's the what do you
Like,
think?
What would you do?
Flats, you go first.
Yeah, what would you do, Flats? Let's hear this.
I think Alex is 100% right. It can't be just hero every 4 or 5 months and maps every other season. Especially with like how competitive the gaming space is. Everyone's fighting for someone's attention. And even if like personally you might feel like if you felt Overwatch was in a good place, overall, like eventually people get bored of just the same thing over and over and over, and something new to spark their attention really does bring like life back to it. I look to like Fortnite when they did like their revamp of like going back on like the original release, and yeah, they prey on nostalgia with that and that kind of stuff, but like that was a big moment for them. It did bring a lot of players back. It did bring a lot of excitement back, and I'm not saying like Overwatch needs to do that, although I'm sure there's tons of people that would want that. They would just something big enough to like move the needle, because even though like Overwatch has changed a lot in the past 2 years,
I have a point on the Fortnite thing here in a minute.
In some ways, like very much for the better, even though people may not know that, or they don't know the communications, or they don't know about the balance, or they don't know like.
I do want to pause for a second here, and then we'll let Flats continue on this one. Flats brings up like Fortnite and what they did with like bringing back their like no build. I mean, not no build. No build was another one thing they did. Bringing back like their like first season type of style. The one thing that I think he doesn't mention here too with Fortnite is that Fortnite has been one of those games willing to take those massive swings that like Alec just talked about, where they will do things to the game that are wild, but people are interested to go try it, whether they love it or not, right? They at least want to see what it is. And keep in mind, if you play a lot of Fortnite or have a little bit more experience in that, you can definitely put it in the comments to let me know like if that's correct or incorrect. But from an outside looking in, when it comes to Fortnite, I always see them trying to do new things and doing these like really huge events and like these things that get players to at least log on and want to try it. And I think that's sometimes where Overwatch has, as of recent, they don't give you that reason that you want to go on and do that, because it's mostly been like, oh, we have a new event, go buy the bundle, rinse and repeat. But you have other examples of like April Fool's events, and like when they did like the Mirror Watch, I mean, the Creator Card event, etc., while it's not amazing, it gives players another way to play Overwatch, and that can be helpful. But they need to do more than just that. They need to go for those larger swings. It doesn't need to be at like the level of Fortnite where they're like, doing major shakeups after every single season, but they definitely need to do more things that will get a player to have a reason to want to log into Overwatch and play it. For me personally, I love the game and I play it, so like that's why I play a lot. But I definitely can see where you need a lot of these other things to really get a player involved.
But yeah, I think it's honestly a combination of a few things, but I mostly agree with Alec that it's just got to be something big.
You kind of have to do that job. It's just like in a different way.
I feel like underestimating the lore has been such a huge part of Overwatch. Like their cinematics hit so hard and they don't do them enough.
To more of you guys' answers, I think I agree with the things you guys said. I think so. Just to summarize as well, what you guys said: more open communication, like paint a clear vision and then deliver on it, and then also bring some surprises. So I think all those things are really good. I think ultimately, whatever players you bring in and out, they have to be satisfied with the game they're playing. So I think the game has to satisfy the players, and then I would think, big picture, we need to make people fall in love with the Overwatch heroes again. Because I think it's a big, open statement, but what drew people early was the like, oh my god, I love the Dragon Short, I love Genji, I love Hanzo, I love seeing what they're doing, I love Mercy. Obviously, it's very easy for me to sit here and say, yeah, I want that TV show, as Flats already mentioned. I want that Netflix show. I think I've told you guys this.
I've said it 100 times. I want that show. Please.
But anything I think that you guys can do to
please give us a show.
Players fall in love with the heroes again.
Come
we know
on.
PvE is kind of not happening in the way it was going to happen. But I think we need to fall in love with Overwatch again, I think, is the TLDR.
You talked about some of the other games that have come out, in the meantime, right?
Yep.
And there's games that have
Marvel
come out.
Rivals.
There's competitive games that have been out for a long time. I think that have some things maybe that Overwatch is missing a bit. And one of those things is
touch on that a bit.
Either like we talk about this internally a lot, either like a greater strategic depth or player agency.
Okay.
And
I want to pause that there because they talk about player agency a lot. And this is why I really think I would not doubt it if Overwatch starts to go into that, like every hero has a type of passive. I heard about it. I don't know if it's still in Paladins, but I know Paladins had it or has it. I know Apex has it. And there's probably a couple other games I'm forgetting off the top of my head that have this, but like given the ability to have a couple of options for your hero gives you more agency over the hero rather than like an example I made is like, imagine you're playing Dorado when you're a Torb main, right? And first point you might be able to get away with something, but second point's you're going to run into mobility issues, right? Where you can't get to high grounds, you can't make, plays the way that you want to make them, etc., right? There's a lot of things that are like an issue there. So imagine if like Torb had like 3 different options and you could be like, okay, I'm going to play a mobile Torb, right? You lose maybe 50% of what Molten Core gives you, but you gain mobility. And now you can be a more effective Torb on a map that normally wouldn't be a good map for you. So it gives you more agency over your hero and doesn't let the map really dictate that. One of the things with Overwatch sometimes is the map can dictate your hero selection. And on top of that, the hero selection may not be something you want to play. Like you may be a Torb player and you don't want to play Widow, but you might be forced into Widow. But now because you have more decisions and more things that you can make, it adds an extra strategy to it. Now, whether that's good or bad for Overwatch, I couldn't tell you, but it's something that I'm very intrigued by because I think it could definitely open up how Overwatch is played and create another layer of excitement to the hero that you want to play. So they talk about that a lot. They'll probably go on a little bit more of a discussion about that, but I did want to kind of point out that, like, I am very much looking forward to that if they end up going down that route. Now, that could change. Maybe they don't end up doing something like that, but if they end up doing, like, multiple different talents or passives for each hero individually, that could be a very intriguing and exciting aspect to Overwatch that could lead to a much different and more exciting level of Overwatch gameplay. So we'll see. I just wanted to kind of get that in there as I keep talking.
That was part of what the pickable passives, quick play hacks was
There you
trying
go.
to get at. Are there other systems that we could potentially put into this game that give players more agency or that start giving the game a little bit more strategic depth to it?
Now, doesn't that very much seem like that is what Aaron is alluding to? Because, like, when I think about strategic depth, what else is there? Now, maybe it's a different way that you cue the game, but, like, doesn't that very much seem like that's what Aaron is alluding to here? Is that we want to give players more strategy and more abilities to have your own individual choice over how the game goes, right? And that's what it sounds like to me. I think they've been alluding to that. I think that's why they put the pickable passives in there. I would not doubt it if we see the game go that route. Now, will that happen tomorrow? Probably not, but I would not doubt it if that's one of the surprises that Alec keeps alluding to that Alec had alluded to.
You start looking at like, what are the things we can do to the core game to start either improving it from a competitive standpoint or doing things like adding strategic depth or player agency to it in or out of the game. That could also be something like a map voting system. And then what are the really big bets that we can make?
So they bring up map voting system. I don't really mind the idea of a map voting system. I think like the one thing that map voting systems can do for them is make them understand the maps that people don't like, so that way when like, you know, if Dorado gets voted out every single time, that gives them the opportunity for, especially the people working on maps, to be like, okay, what can we go do about Dorado? No one wants to play this map. Like, we need to finally like look at these maps and see why they're getting banned. Like, you probably won't see Kings Row get banned a lot, but I wouldn't doubt it if you see a map like Antarctic Peninsula or Dorado get banned a lot, or even Nambani. I like Nambani because I'm a Diva player, but I get why people struggle on that map. Is like, it gives them reasons to go look at those maps and maybe give it like another like go through and like, maybe we need to change this. What are the pain points of these maps? And I think that becomes really important there. So like, maybe that's where map votes could be good. As long as it doesn't come down to like, I know in other games there's been like, can't you like grind to like the highest rank in some games if you just play one map? Like, that's why like it would have to be a map vote and the map selection would have to be kind of random. But there's definitely something there that could work. But we'll see.
Outside of like our community, this like very invested hardcore community, there's a much bigger gaming community outside of that.
Yes.
And there's a lot of opportunities to, I think, reintroduce Overwatch, the PvP shooter, to that community.
Yeah.
I need to pause that for a second, because isn't that a very intriguing statement by Aaron? And the reason why I say it's very intriguing is because it isn't, he's not really saying that like they need to go and like fix balance for these other players. They say they want to introduce Overwatch to people in the broad gaming community, like in general. So does that mean they have other ideas up their sleeve that would get players who aren't necessarily a fan of current Overwatch, but get those players into Overwatch in like a new setting? And that's a very interesting like statement by Aaron there, because it kind of alludes to the idea that they're looking into multiple ways to get players who don't play Overwatch to play it outside of like a major balance change. And truthfully, when it comes to balance, while balance is always like a hot topic in Overwatch, that generally won't be like the balance can get people to not play it, but I think a lot of times other major things they can bring into the game that would get players to want to play it. Because sometimes I think there's a lot of focus on balance, even though it can be really hard to balance a game like Overwatch. But I'll talk about a little bit of that later on.
I think one of our goals right now as a game is to restore the social fabric within the game. I think that's been something that we recognize has been lost over time. And, you know, games come out at different times. I think even the way people communicate has changed, right?
Oh, yeah.
Just look at how many people are in Discord now compared to, you know, when Overwatch first launched, and how people communicate through that versus like in-game chat, right?
You know, Alec does bring up a good point there. Like, yeah, I sometimes will like talk about how there isn't many people like communicating in my games anymore. But like at the beginning of Overwatch into like Overwatch now, like a lot of people do just like to hang out with their friends on Discord, and they like to just duo queue and talk to them. And maybe they won't talk in game, but they might be listening to your call outs, right? So I've never really like thought about it that way, that like over the past 8 years of Overwatch, you can even push it to 9 years if you played in the beta, like the way that you communicate now is a lot different. While Discord existed, it wasn't quite at the level it is now where like everybody's using it. So let's make a valid point there. I think sometimes I haven't really looked at it that way. At the same time, not wrong about the social aspect of the game. It's kind of this. Actually, if anybody played WoW, this issue happened in WoW where they took away a lot of the social aspects, and people got. It was kind of where like it started to make or break if people wanted to play it or not. In the sense of like, WoW used to be a very social game, and then it became a very single player game, and now they've started to move towards more kind of back into the social aspect of the game, but like not to like what like classic WoW is. So sorry, I play WoW, so it's like you'll hear me reference WoW a couple times. It's just a little side tangent to like, yeah, communication is definitely shifted in games, and you can see it when I'm playing in top 500 games. Like it is, no one communicates anymore. And a lot of people have valid reasons as to why they don't. But it's also like, just like I said, that's why I like hearing Alec's point of like, just people communicate differently now in games. Like a lot of people just hang out in Discord, and sometimes they just don't want to communicate in game. So
there's not going to be a one size fits all approach for this. And so I think that there is something really interesting about kind of having this range of competitiveness that we offer people in the game. But also we have to be cognizant that like people kind of play it for different reasons. So for us, like ranked, and like as you start getting into high levels of ranked, we treat that as an experience that we really need to protect the competitive integrity of it, and we put a lot of our efforts around balance even and hero design into like making sure that that side of the game stays as competitive as we can make it. But then as we start looking at some other parts of it, yeah, we want people to be able to have serious games of Overwatch. It's just not going to be quite as serious as it is when you get into calm.
I do want to say, and I know that they will talk about this soon, like, quick play has become a lot, like, people will say sweaty. And I think sometimes people really want, like, an extra casual mode now, and, like, a lot of people will reference, like, oh, go play, like, arcade. Problem is, arcade, it has different health pools, has a different style. And they do talk about a little bit of, like, what if they added, like, an unranked mode? And I'll talk about that a little bit later, but I definitely want to see what their vision is, because I feel like there's a lot of discussions back and forth about, like, should your quick play start becoming, like, basically counter swap mode? Because that's what it feels like a lot of time in quick play is, like, I actually will see more counter swaps in quick play than I do in ranked. Now, granted, that could be based off of, like, what rank they're in, etc. Like, but, like, I definitely see quick play has struggled a little bit to enjoy it as much as I used to, because, like, it's not... I'm trying to think of a way to explain this. It's become, like... And I think that gets referenced here, like, competitive light a little bit, but, like, without the reward of, you know, seeing yourself climb or seeing what the results of that can be. So it's an interesting discussion, because there's a lot of quick play players. Now, I guess here's my question for you if you got to this far in the video. Maybe I should do a separate video on this, but why do you play quick play? And I want to know that because I want to get an understanding of, like, what your reason behind playing quick play is, because they discuss, like, why people play quick play, but, like, what is the reason you play it? Do you play it to play with your friends? Is that why you play quick play? Do you play it because it's very competitive to you and you want it to be a competitive experience? Do you play quick play just because you love Overwatch, you just want to play your favorite hero and you don't really care as much? I'm not saying you don't care to win, but, like, you just want to have a good time. Why do you play quick play? And if there's other reasons besides that, let me know, because I want to learn more about this side of the game. Obviously, I played ranked for so many years that, like, sometimes I don't understand every aspect of it. And obviously, the more I've done videos, I've learned more about quick play, the more I've played quick play. Hi, Sally, coming to say hi. But I want to know what you do and why you play quick play and what is your reason and all that. So if you made it this far, heck yeah. I know it's a long video, so.
Sure. Alec, anything you want to add for
That was good.
Flats follow-up? Okay,
Go ahead.
awesome. Flats, go ahead. Anything you want to add to what was discussed?
Not really a ton. Just I personally think that quick play should be, like, way less of a comp system. I know most people play it, I know whatnot, but at least to me, as a mostly former competitive player at this point, I don't even play it that much anymore. I've always viewed as quick play as, like, the more fun, have a good time with friends, like, play with, like, off rolls type of game mode.
Learn a hero.
But it does feel like as Overwatch 2 has gone on, it's almost like ranked light.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that totally is the vibe that should be going for it, because sometimes you just want to load up and, like, play your off roll or play something else, and it's like sometimes you feel like you kind of have to just lock in, right? Because, like, the game is so much harder. And maybe it's just me not misremembering, like, Overwatch 1 leading into Overwatch 2 didn't totally feel as, I don't know, sweaty, I guess is a good word.
Okay, I gotta pause this.
Saying it.
I gotta pause this right now, because as Flat says that, I can say without a doubt, we didn't play quick play at all in Overwatch 1 for the most part. So I don't even know how sweaty quick play was in Overwatch 1, and obviously I know Flats wasn't playing a ton of quick play then either, because we were playing a lot at the same time. So how was quick play in Overwatch 1? And the reason why I didn't play it as much in Overwatch 1 was because I was just so, like inserted into, like, just top 500, like, play 30 games a day type of, like, scenario. Obviously, if you've watched me now, I've shifted a little bit that, more like mystery heroes, quick play. I still play, you know, 700 to 800 ranked games this season, which is pretty good. Pretty good cadence for, you know, 9-week seasons. I'd say I play quite a lot. And I still manage to play a lot of quick play, etc. And I don't know what Overwatch 1 quick play was. Was it really sweaty? Did you find it was a more casual experience? Once again, if you've made it this far, let me know. Because, like, I'm learning more about how Overwatch 1 quick play was now. And as someone who didn't play it at all in Overwatch 1, outside of when the game first launched, I don't know what quick play became, and I definitely would like to know more about that.
So that's at least how I feel about it, because I think the competitive side should always be competitive and like you said before, have that competitive integrity to it and really, be protected. Though I do think there are some things that could be done with it. Like, for example, top 500 doesn't really feel that competitive. I barely play ranked anymore. And I can, as long as I
don't
finish
get
with
me
50
started.
wins, I can easily hold it. And I don't even think I deserve it at the moment. Like, it's really not that difficult. And so there's probably some things maybe even on that side that could be looked at, but I think that's for another time.
Okay, so I do want to pause right there because I'm taking my headset off for a second too. Chat knows this one. They always meme. The one way to get me to rant about anything is talking about the top 500 system. So I want to talk about it for a second because Flats mentioned this right there where he says he doesn't think he deserves it, but it's easy to maintain. And I want to explain why it works that way. So basically the way the top 500 currently works is you can camp the ladder. And what camping the ladder means is that once you get to a certain spot on the ladder, you don't have to play the game anymore at all. Flats, essentially, for the past 10 seasons or so, has basically just... He only plays the minimum amount of games, and he'll stay in the top 500 spot, even if he goes like... We used to joke about it. He'd go like 48 and 52, and then that's it. He'd finish somewhere on the ladder because of like the little bit of a boost you get at the beginning, and then that's it. He would be like rank like 50, and then if you play the rest of the way, you would see that fluctuate, and then he would finish the season at rank like 105 without touching ranked for 6 weeks. You see the problem here. The ladder hasn't become much of a competitive ladder anymore. A lot of it is people camping the ladder, alt accounts, and cheaters on top 500. Actually, if you look at the previous, I can't remember which region it was, but there was about 200 spots missing from one of the regions on top 500 because it was accounts that were literally cheaters that got removed from top 500. So you have top 300 at that point, and then you could probably account another 75 to 100 alt accounts. That clearly is made up data on my side, so I could be wrong. But from the sounds of it, now you have top 250. And that's the problem where you run into issues with top 500 is where like it's not a competitive ladder anymore. It is literally you get to where you want to, you leave it as is, and then you don't have to worry about it the rest of the season. And that's a problem, right? Because you want your ladder to be a back and forth competitive thing. And that's why Flats was referencing like, oh, like he doesn't think he deserves it anymore because he hasn't really grinded the ladder anymore because he doesn't have to. No one really has to. Like if you're like in that top 100, top 200 area of top 500, I mean, maybe even higher than that, you really don't have to play the game after you get to a certain point. So what do? You log on the alt account. That funnels more alts in. That changes the way the matchmaking works in top 500, which people are like, what do you mean you can't? It's top 500, you can't do that. I can tell you this much. If I have a player who's like a top 10 player playing on an alt account in a GM5 game, it is a night and day difference when your DPS player is a legit GM5 DPS player, and then they are a top 10 player, and then they're playing in those ranks. Like you run into these issues across the board. So that's kind of what he's referencing there, where you have like, they talk about how they want to keep the competitive integrity of it, but like top 500 has been untouched for 5 years. And we're literally at 5 years now. It's been a topic of discussion for years where they got rid of a system they had before where you had to compete, you had to play more games, you had to like do all this. They had a decay system, all of that. They got rid of it because they expected people to flex queue all the time, so they didn't want to have people like juggle each part of the ladder. That didn't happen, of course, because a lot of players don't want to flex queue. At top end, keep in mind if there's a lot of flex queues, I'm willing to bet in like a lot of other ranks, but in top 500, a lot of people stick to their role, and that has been a problem in top 500. I know I went on a rant about it again there, but that's what the problem's been, right? And I do want to say something about Flat saying he doesn't think he deserves it. He's good enough to be in top 500. He would be in top 500. He's more along the lines of saying that he shouldn't have to just only play to get 50 wins and then just AFK it. Like he technically he could keep playing ranked, but like there's no incentive past that. Like it doesn't feel competitive anymore, and that's why top 500. You'll hear a lot from players where like top 500 has just changed a lot, and at the same time, when you have to put your resources into each one, of course, like when it comes to top 500, they're not going to go into that niche side of it. We're like, oh, we need to rebuild top 500. It's going to cost this much. They're going to go, well, no, because it's very niche. So I'm glad he brings it up, but I think it's also why he kind of moved on to the next point because he's not going to get the answer that he's looking for in that one. So, but yeah, Flats, you can definitely still be in top 500. I mean, you are a top 500 player. It's just more along the lines of the point he's making is like, it shouldn't be he only has to play the bare minimum and then never have to touch it again. It'd be the equivalent of like, imagine if you were watching sports, a team went 4-0 at the beginning of a season and said, hey, we have a 1,000% win rate or 100% win rate. We're good. We're not playing the rest of the season. See you in the playoffs. That's kind of a very like aggressive example of that. But that's basically what it is. Like, imagine if you didn't have to play anymore. You're going to be no matter what the number 1 seed at that point because you played 4 games and decided, well, I'm good. We're not playing anymore. So, see you later. We'll see you at the end of the season. And that's the problem the ladder runs into. Sorry. Huge tangent there. People, chat gets me going all the time about top 500. It's a great discussion, and I could go even more in depth on that. Maybe I should do a video one day, but like honestly, it's so niche that I don't even know if people would really care as much about that because it doesn't affect most of like Overwatch. It's just a very small part of it. So, all right. Anyway,
we used to talk about like a third queue. Like, hey, is there like ranked quick play and like the thing under quick play or the thing in between
unranked.
Quick play and ranked?
Do it.
Yeah, so like
try it at least.
We used to have a lot of discussions around it, and maybe it's time to
just try it.
Talk about those some more. Like some of the downsides to it is like the more queues we introduce, like the more it kind of splits up the player base.
Well, WoW's doing that right now, and they're seeing success.
Players
so you can
also
do it.
They self-select into the one that they think that they ought to be playing. So in any one of those, you're still going to get, because there's people in comp that treat it just as like the clown car version of a game where they're just doing whatever they want to, right?
I mean, that's what top 500 is become.
Still have people in
the clown
every
car.
one of those treating it just as serious as they do. And so like when we used to talk about it, we never really acted on it because we thought it might just play out the same as what we've got right now with people asking for a 4th queue after we introduce the 3rd one.
Just to pause right there, I think it's okay to try it. Like what if you put up an unranked mode for a season? And I say a season because, like, of course, when you put up an unranked mode, you're probably going to get an influx of players. Like, put it in for a season, see what happens, right? Like, here's the thing. Here's my take on it. What's going to be better? Having another option for players to go and play another version of a mode, right? And instead of the player just not playing the game because like they're not enjoying their quick play experience, or you have a player who plays quick play seriously and doesn't enjoy the experience because their teammates aren't in the same vibe as them, but they don't want to play comp, maybe you add a 3rd option, and you just see what happens in like a 2-month period. If the player numbers aren't really there to back up like the justification of keeping it, then you can say you tried it, right? Because you can't really put like an unranked into a quick play hack and be like, okay, we'll see how it is. Like it's unranked, it's comp but unranked, right? So maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but that's why I want to see them try these things. And yes, there's a discussion about splitting the player base, but I think like if you have a fun mode, players will still play. But at the same time, I think trying it is a good step, and if it doesn't work, at least you know it doesn't work. It's better than theorizing on it.
Like one of the things that we look at a lot is, or we talk about internally is stomps in the game, and there can be a lot of different reasons for stomps, but they don't feel good when they happen to you.
No, they don't.
One of the factors is levers in a game, and so it's like, do we want to, like, how much freedom do you give somebody to affect another player's experience in the game? I don't think there's like a perfect answer here. It's probably going to be something that like us and every other like social, especially like competitive game is always going to struggle with, but we are trying to find like that right balance of like, how do you give players freedom, but also how do you like try to restrict them from like harming another player's game experience?
Yeah.
It's tough to juggle that.
There. When looking at Stomps, like the spawn system that we have in Quick Play is different than the one in competitive. And we're actually looking at that for Season 12 and maybe some improvements there to see like how we can make that even better experience, hopefully less Stomps in the game as well.
Nice. Thank you. That's very illuminating, actually.
You want a bit of a hot take? And I don't know if this is a hot take. If you have consistently Stomps no matter what, like even if you're the winning team, sometimes that doesn't even feel as fun. I don't know. I just love like really close games. Like, stomps are fun. Don't get me wrong, especially if you're winning in ranked. But I feel like if you're in quick play and you play 10 games in a row and you just stomp, sometimes it doesn't feel as like rewarding as the game that you win somewhat easily, but you're not like, you don't look at the scoreboard and you're 38-0 and everybody on their team is 0-22. Maybe that's just me. That just could be just like, I just like close games. Doesn't mean I don't mind. I like winning, and don't get me wrong, if I go into like 10 ranked games in a row and I stomp every game, I'm not going to be complaining, right? But I definitely feel like in quick play especially, I love when the matches get a little bit closer. But yeah, I feel like it's also just like a player thing at that point. Like players leaving, unfortunately, is just something that like games have, and like I don't know what they can do that will change that, because I still feel like, I don't know, maybe it's gotten better. Maybe their harsher penalties didn't feel good for the person who, you know, let's say that like you have a kid and like you need to go and like take care of something right away. Like you want the option to be able to leave. Something that can pop up, and like sometimes that's probably where it got too aggressive, was like for someone who like went in there with the mindset of like, oh, I have an hour to play, and then something changed last second and they had to go do something, right? Or their internet goes out randomly for like a half of a second. Things that are just so random. It felt bad for the player who wasn't going to abuse the system. Does that make sense? And I think maybe that's where like they need to find something that, like a middle ground of that, where like somebody who needs to take a break, who had the intention of playing a full game, but like couldn't, like it doesn't feel as bad for them if they have to back out a couple times. But that's a whole different discussion, and I'm sure there's difference of opinion on both sides of that. So
into talking about tanks and stuff, because I think these guys have alluded to counter swapping. So do you mind if I?
Yeah, no, go ahead, go right ahead.
Right. So because you know, Alec, you kind of mentioned really saliently there that like, you know, you're playing quick play and people are still like 5-man counter swapping you, and it's very frustrating. So I think that's partly where this 6v6 movement has come from, right? Like people have said, like, look, tank feels maybe worse than ever to play. And it kind of feels like, and certainly the argument on the 6v6 side is that counter swapping is built into the one tank format. Like you have one tank, there will always be counter swapping, and that always will create misery. So is that how you guys view it? Like, do you think that counter swapping will always be a thing in Overwatch 2? Or do you find like there's maybe some way we can alleviate it? And do you agree with the assessment that like people are like, this sucks? Like this, as a format, this sucks. People swapping me all the time.
I love the question.
Yeah, I think there's a few things here, right? First off, what we see, like actually how players behave is so DPS damage players and tank players swap about the same rate, right? They usually swap. You see on average like one a match, and then support players are about half of that, so they swap a lot less. And I think the experience.
And I want to pause there on those numbers. Like, it's an interesting statement. So DPS players have a lot more heroes to pick from, right? So you kind of expect the DPS players to have more options. So like, I understand the DPS players swapping all the time. Here's the interesting tidbit, though. You notice how the support role, that has, you know, a lot less heroes, of course, and then the tank role, which has a lot less heroes than DPS, a little bit more than support now, I think. Do you notice how, like, those numbers aren't aligning? And that is why, like, counter swapping feels terrible for tank, because DPS are usually swapping for, they just have a lot of options. Supports aren't going to swap as much because there isn't as many options, and a lot of the supports feel good, and the tank is almost feels like they have to counter swap, so that's why tanks, hearing that your tank is up there on, like, how often a swap happens shows you a problem there, right? Because, like, that shouldn't be the case. But of course it is, because that's what tanking has become.
That flexibility is really important in the game. We would never want to lock people, you know, into hero roles, into a hero choice for the whole game.
Yeah, I don't think that should be a thing either. I agree with that.
What Overwatch is necessarily about. Swapping in matches actually happens the most, like in Plat and Diamond, compared to other ranks. Whether that be, you know, higher ranks are consolidating on the meta faster, or whether they're more one tricks in that area, and then bronze players just don't do it as much too. It's kind of.
Just to add to that, by the way, Alec's correct. I think the reason why you don't see as many like swaps happen in top 500 is because of meta. Like, meta is generally what wins in top 500. It doesn't mean that like it always wins, because like you need to play it the correct way. But like, if the meta is, you know, a Winston comp and you're going up against a Winston comp, you're not going to switch off of Winston most of the time, because like it's a solved meta, not a solved meta, but like people understand how to play it, so you're not going to get as many swaps. And in bronze, honestly, people are just vibing, having a good time, playing whatever they want. They don't really care about that. Some players just want to vibe out, sit back, have a couple drinks, you know, just chill, play some games. Other people want to, you know, climb. So there's a lot of different variations happening there. But then obviously when you get to that diamond level, that's when it gets really sweaty. You're close to masters. You're getting close to like that top 500 like threshold. So players are constantly looking for solutions to win. So you're getting more swaps because like they're that close to getting to their goal. So a lot of the time they're not like letting the match settle. They just want to swap, counter swap, and that's it.
The kind of like the mastery curve of maybe like any one hero in our game is pretty long. And like the mastery curve of like getting to where you feel like you could be good at Overwatch is pretty huge also. It takes a pretty big time investment to get into this game. It's actually something that we talk about sometimes as being a problem and like a big obstacle for new players getting into our game, because there's just
a lot to learn.
So much you have to learn and be able to sort of like execute on.
I want to talk about that very quickly, because we've seen a lot of like discussion so far about Marvel Rivals, right, as a game. And that's like kind of like, we've been playing Overwatch for so long that like we don't see a lot of the clutter as much as we would normally see it. Like we know a lot of the heroes, etc. But like with Marvel Rivals, you hear like there's a lot of clutter, right? But like Overwatch has that same thing. But once you start to like play something more and understand it more, like a lot of that kind of like not goes away, but it becomes easier to understand. And Overwatch is a game that, like, imagine if you're a new player, never played it, you load in, there's what? I can't, is it 41 heroes or 40 heroes right now? You load in, good luck. Like, it's going to take a while. So, kind of what Aaron is saying is that there's a lot it goes into master a hero in Overwatch, and, like, it's not as simple as, you know, you play it for 1 hour, and, like, so I think he's trying to just more alleviate, like, or try to define what he considers casual in comparison to what Flats considers casual, which his was like if you play for, like, 2 hours a month or something, so.
And then, like, I think the other thing to remember is, like, we've got, like, millions of players every day logging in to Overwatch.
Well, Twitter
and, like,
would say it's alt
look at
accounts.
our own, like, internal metrics on it. Like, the game, it feels like it's pretty sticky for a lot of these players. There's, like, a lot of people that feel like they're enjoying this game and continuing, you know, and like in their interaction of it. And so, like, I think that, like, from our point of view, it's like, yeah, I think like we acknowledge the feedback and that there's things to be doing with tanks. And I don't think it's just counter swapping. Like the thing we haven't talked about yet also is like the pressure put on that tank player
on the tank,
as well.
yeah.
You know, so
that's
like,
the number
I
one
think that there's
issue.
things to do there.
People had that concern,
especially in the world of 5v5, like in the world where.
First of all, yes, the pressure actually was something I remember a lot of people talking about at the beginning of Overwatch. Like even like right when they announced 5v5 in Overwatch 1, that was one of the concerns people did have, and it's very interesting to see that still was like at the top of the list of like, as a tank player, you're front and center, and like some players just don't want that, right? Understandably so. I can say that one thing that has shifted for me as a tank player going into Overwatch 2 is like, you have way more pressure. And like sometimes it's really hard to make the correct play because there's so many things happening, but everybody on your team expects you to do everything perfectly. And even if you are, if the other tank even remotely shows any more value than you, even though you're getting value in different ways, they think you're just terrible, tank diff, etc. Like, they could have a queen running into the back line and killing 3 people, and you're trying to go in and do the same thing, but like they're peeling. Meanwhile, your teammates are turning their monitors off while that's happening. They're going to blame you, but in reality, it's a misplay across the board, right? So the tank ends up getting so much of that pressure and like aggravation from their teammates, when in reality, sometimes it's not even like the tank's fault. It's the way that your team is playing, but the tank is the one that is solely focused in that situation.
There's five players on each team.
Oh.
I think we've got.
Also want to point out, why was he about to say 4v something? Did you catch that one too? Like he said, he started with 4v and then he went to 5. What does that mean? That I don't know if I should look deeply into that or if I should just like kind of leave it as is. But that is very that either that's like a random slip up on something, or like it's just completely random and he just started with 4v whatever he was gonna say. But something to think about.
And maybe, like, I don't know if I had to get into this, like, maybe I'm going a little too far here, but, like, I know a lot of people talk about that, like, the mythical, you know, October balance patch, right?
Yep.
Where it's like, hey, here's where, like 6v6 was in the very best state that it was, you know, to where it's like, if you never had that for Overwatch 1, would people still kind of be in this same headspace? Is there a version of balance in Overwatch 2 that achieves those same goals?
I'm gonna pause for a second because I think that's a good discussion point about like balance in 6v6. One of the reasons why balance in 6v6 became easier is because there was no heroes introduced for a long time, right? So it becomes a lot easier when you're not. It's usually said, I mean, maybe it's not a Life Weaver, that a new hero can really shift the meta in some form, some way. It could just be one hero. It could be like a different map. Something changes, right? But at the same time, if you look at when Overwatch 1 was at its most balanced, it was also when Overwatch 1 was also not getting updates, not getting anything done. Nothing was changing. And when it was fully balanced, that was the least of why a lot of people didn't care at that point. Like, people just wanted content. They wanted they wanted a reason to play Overwatch, and it wasn't going to be because the game was perfectly balanced, right? You can love the game, and you could want good balance, but I think a lot of time that's what you want to achieve is more of like just good enough balance to where you don't feel like one hero was overtaking everybody, and we've seen that with Orisa and Roadhog and like Mauga, for example. You don't want to see that, right? And I think they're getting better at getting out of that now. It used to be a long time to like shift out of that, but like to like what Aaron's saying of like, would there be a difference of opinion of like it wasn't balanced, etc. I think a lot of what came down to people enjoying or referencing that patch is also perfect balance does not mean everybody's going to play your game, right? It's really how you shift your balance, and I don't think you can really ever perfectly balance a game like Overwatch. I think there's too many variables, right? It's like you don't have the same map design, right? So like a hero like Sim might dominate on a King's Row, but if you put Sim on Havana, you might see some struggles on first and third point. Doesn't mean you can't make Sim work. I've actually seen a Sim make Havana work, but like I'm more, making the example of like, it's hard to truly balance a game when you don't have everything as aligned in that sense. Like you'd have to have like maps, like just be like the same design across the board to then be able to find that like true semblance of even remotely close to balance. But the truth is, they'll never be able to balance the game fully. It's just how frequently they do and how quickly they get rid of like the pain points and like the issues or the heroes that cause issues. And that's more of like what I think they should look to achieve.
So I think there's constant improvement happening. Map reworks coming in season 13, right?
Okay, so
that we've spoken about as well. So I think evaluating all of that, I think there's really still a very strong foundation, but we need to make a lot of elements in the game more rewarding.
I agree.
Make sure that there's times you come back to play Overwatch because there's something going on that's very special, and I think there's a few of those like coming up. But also,
and I talked about that point earlier. It needs to be something special. They can't expect the collabs to get somebody to come back and play it for a long time. A huge fan of Overwatch might hop on to grab the bundle and play a few games, but that's not going to keep them playing for, hundreds of hours again, right? So Alec brings up a very valid point of like, there needs to be reasons, and truthfully, maybe I'm just biased because I'm an Overwatch streamer and I love the game. People want to play Overwatch. Just give them a reason to. Like that's really what it is. Just give someone a reason to play Overwatch. They want to play it. But if you keep it stale or stagnant sometimes, that's when people go look for other games to play. People want to play this game. Give people reasons to play it.
It's too early to talk about some of those. You'll start seeing some things coming later this year that'll probably, kind of like give people hints and point to different systems that can be coming.
I needed to pause there because you can tell, and I don't know what SVB brought up in that question, that Aaron is now kind of like, he has to go into PR mode because something's coming. You know what I mean? But he can't explain it, and he doesn't want to like spoil whatever it is. So basically, something along the lines might be coming there. We just don't know what it is because he can't really answer it because then it gives away too much. So that's cool.
And if you look at the way we've designed tanks, we've tried to give some of them a little bit ways to let their team feel their presence more too, right? I think when you take the recent Wrecking Ball change to adaptive shields, it's supposed to be like a little thing Wrecking Ball can use from time to time that his team can appreciate Wrecking Ball's presence, right? And he's able to actually maybe help them from time to time too. It's not necessarily the main way Wrecking Ball is playing, but something there. So I think having a tank on your team leading the charge, a lot of players are kind of looking for that. And if you're playing a different role than that, then it kind of creates a lot of friction. And you get
I do want to pause for a second because I'll forget about the Wrecking Ball point. I talk about it in my spectating sometimes. It's called perceived value is what I've been calling it. Where like your tank could be popping off, but you have no idea, so you assume your tank is feeding and doing nothing. And that's why they added that extra thing to Wrecking Ball, so that Wrecking Ball can give you a perceived value of like, okay, your ball went in, grabbed a bunch of shields, and has now transferred shields over to the whole team. We've now given you value, right? So I do want to bring up that a little bit. That's kind of what Alex kind of alluding to there is like, even now in tanking, like, because you're the only tank, if you're playing a hero that isn't quite in the front line, everybody just assumes you're feed and not doing anything because the perceived value, the value that they can see isn't existent, so they assume you're just playing bad. When in reality, you might be making a ton of plays, but they don't see it, so they assume you're just sucking.
Yeah, there is a lot of social friction, and that's something we talk about a lot.
Yeah.
Are there ways we could just better educate the player base as a whole, where they have a role too in the way the team is composed, right? Like your support players can also switch and they can also do these things. They can also play different positions, but you're correct, Flats. I do think they expect your teammates expect the tank to do kind of everything.
Yes.
A lot of the time.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that comes to the part where you battle your teammates, right? A lot of like counter swap, and like if you're on Diva and they go Zarya, well, yeah, you can go like Winston, but then like if your teammates are never willing to make a swap to help you in like that counter swap situation, the tank is the one that gets focused the most, and everybody's like, well, what are you doing? Like, it's like, well, no, like if you went this hero, then that would help. But they're like, no, I don't want to swap. You have to swap. You're the tank who has to deal with their counter swap, because they look at it as like, they'll look at it as like a 1-to-1 like transaction of like, okay, their tank swaps, you must swap, and that's it. But like, let's say that this is not the best example, but let's say that you're on Roadhog, and then they go Roadhog because they love playing Hog, and like that's going to be the benefit. But their team runs Ana Kiriko, and your team runs Mercy Moira or Moira Zenyatta. Who is going to have a worse time there? More than likely the Hog with like the Moira Zenyatta, right? Now, if they swap to Ana Kiriko, now you're back to an even fight. But like, what can you do at that point? Yeah, you can swap to Orisa, but then you might still run into the same issues, right? There's so many variables there that everybody expects the tank to have this 1-to-1 like scenario where you swap. But then like, that's it. It just if your teammates aren't willing to go help you, then you're going to struggle there. So counter swapping feels even worse, because like if your teammates aren't willing to help you, but your teammates expect you to be the one to always make the swaps, it feels frustrating as a tank player.
I'm going to combine 2 questions into one to hopefully save some time. In the blog, it seemed like there was some hardware constraints with Overwatch 2 being a bigger game and a heavier game overall. Could the game even switch to handle 6v6? And if it did switch, is there a rough estimate on how long it would even take to, like, how much work would it take to switch the game from 5v5 to 6v6 if the test decided that this was a better format for the game?
Yeah, that's there's maybe like a little bit of context for that, because I think the answer is going to be it depends. You know, we are in a period where we are investigating like kind of like the total sum of what that work would be.
That's good to know.
But so like there's a range, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, where it's something that would be probably several seasons to much longer, depending on, you know, like reaction from the community base.
I do like that it's like they're a little side note to this one. I do like that they're like willing to already kind of prepare for that rather than like, okay, let's see what the reaction is first, then come up with a plan. They're basically coming up with, okay, what if it goes well? What would that look like? What would the cost look like? And it can probably save them some time, some effort that they would have to do then and they can do now. So I like to hear that they at least prepare for that. It's always a good sign when they're doing that. So regardless of what the result is in this like 5v5, 6v6 battle, very much sounds like they want to go with 5v5, but like they're also saying they're putting in things in place in case it becomes a hit and they need to like really segue fast into that. So good to hear.
I guess at that point, like, you know, if it's a couple seasons to sounding like potentially years or a year or more, if it was even like a hell yeah, like let's go in, would that even be counting heroes that potentially need reworks? Because I couldn't see like Malga working, you know, like or you know, even heroes that I think are great like Junker Queen like probably need some tuning. Or
I'm gonna be honest with you, I think Queen fits perfectly fine in 6v6 if they were to do that. I don't think Queen would need much, like tuning, yes, but like I don't think you need to do any aggressive changes. Malga I can understand, but Queen is actually a really fun hero that could do fine in either 5v5 or 6v6. Just think like off tank.
In that world that we're kind of theoretically talking about right now is also accepting queue times, right? Rather than having a plan for how to actually go about trying to make those better too. I think some of the experiments we're going to run are targeted at maybe making those things better, making queue times better. But if we end up, you know, theoretically, if it goes to roll queue 6v6, we kind of know that's a problem already.
Yeah.
There needs to be something there that can, you know, help alleviate that over time too.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be just.
Is there any early ideas on how to fight those queue times?
So I think that there's maybe like a
secondary
few things
role
we could talk about. One thing we hear a lot from the community is just like make tanks more fun, you know?
That's it.
And
Just
maybe
make
there's
tanks
a
more
bit
fun.
of that we can do. I actually think
I will say this much, chat. Even if they made tanks more fun, I don't think it would change the ratio that players queue. If you read the blog post by Aaron, it was very like you could add 100 million players to the game right now, and if the ratio was the exact same, the queue times would not change. Because like if only 15% of your players are playing tank, that will not shift the ratios, right? So, you know, maybe there's a way they could do like a hybrid like queue where like you have a secondary role, which could be the tank. So like you're kind of going into the game as a tank, but you have flexibility to like go to DPS. So then it becomes like a 1-3-2 type of comp. But like that is just a whole different world that they'd have to look into and all that. But one thing's for sure that like tanking is just one of those roles that it's games, and I can reference World of Warcraft here, have tried so hard to make the tank role really fun and hope that it changes how many people queue the tank role. Tank role is just a role that, you know, people play, but it's not even close to as popular as DPS or support. And that's why they're saying that, like, if they ever do something like this and it becomes the mainstay again, queue times this might just be something that's a part of it. And, you know, even if they can alleviate it by, like, you know, 10%, 20%, like, it would still be pretty long queues.
I don't think you ever get to make like tank as popular as DPS in like a game, you know? So
I agree.
It's like we could shift it and mitigate it a bit, but that would need to be something that I think we would be looking at in that world. And then I think some of the other things that we would talk about doing is coming up with a less restrictive like way of queuing into the game, you know, like that'd probably be where some of our initial experiments would run. And I get that is something that could happen in 5v5 also. Like this, it is a different topic to where, yes, that you could do something like that in 6v6, you could do something like that in 5v5, but we would look at something like that in 6v6 too. And then there is a question, and like I wouldn't want this to be the answer, but like I think as a team we have to be open to like any sort of reality that makes the game better. Like there is a world where like people want a certain format that they're willing to put up with longer queue times to have it. And
Open queue's an example.
That's just the game that they want, you know? So it's like some people might actually want that and prefer it. You know, so like we are like kind of like,
I want to point out there's a different approach here from Aaron, because we used to hear the quote, you think you want it, but you don't. What Aaron is saying that if people want it, there's a world, and by the way, that was a reference to a WoW quote, and I'll explain that in a second. Aaron's basically saying that maybe there is a world where if they can't figure out a solution for, you know, a way to get players who just enjoy 6v6 to enjoy the game, that they just give them 6v6 in like a different section, and like the caveat is that you're going to have longer queues, and that's that. And then the reference to the quote of that I was bringing, there a lot of players have wanted classic World of Warcraft for a long time, years ago, and they never gave it to them. And that was one of the quotes, like, you think you want it, but you don't. But then players kept saying, no, we want this. And then guess what? Classic WoW is a pretty successful part of WoW now. It isn't. I'm not saying it's getting retail numbers, but it's a core part of the game now. And as a WoW player, I love having the option to go and play classic WoW if I want to. I love having the option to log on to retail. I love having the option to be able to play both, right? And I think it's a really cool concept, and I think that's something that Aaron's alluding to that way. Like, it's not his number one option, and he would like to go different routes to get there, but like, he's not saying that he won't make that an option. He just doesn't, that's not his number one priority. So it's a very interesting take on that too. So maybe like, if the 6v6 experiment doesn't go the way that people like, and they can't find a way to make 5v5 work, 6v6 work in current Overwatch 2, then maybe they just put it up anyway for players who do enjoy that 6v6 mode. And while the one caveat is that you'll have longer queue times, but if you're willing to sit through those, you'll be able to play the game that you want to play. And it's a very interesting take on that. So,
SCB, I want to rip it. I don't want to take away any of your time.
Okay, I'm gonna just for the editing's sake here, I know what Flats is gonna ask. He's gonna ask about 7v7, and the answer is no. Nicely. It's funny because I had a whole discussion with Flats about it. We were talking about and pretty much Aaron's answers were talking about like ratios and how like it wouldn't change it much. I was telling Flats that because like, you still need tank players to queue, and it won't matter. Like, yeah, you can maybe get it from like 7 minutes on average to like 5.5 minutes, but like even that won't change like the top end and down to like bronze, etc. So like, answer was no. I'm just doing this for the sake of like, this question was kind of more of a meme question, and if you want me to do more of a full reaction to it later on, I can. But yeah.
Do you? It's great to hear that you're experimenting, but do you kind of? There's been a lot of Overwatch, I'll say clones, we might say generously competitors that have been kind of coming around recently. Do you look at them and kind of get lessons from them, like relearn some lessons? Because they're kind of, a lot of them, one that rhymes with Arvel Kivels, that is kind of going through
I don't know what game he's talking about.
Same decisions that earlier Watch went through. Does having them experiment for you in some way, does that kind of give you lessons?
So I'm going to pause here, and I'm going to do a separate video on this in the next week. But what I will say to this is competition is good, and it can help both games make each other better. I think there's a world where Marvel Rivals actually makes Overwatch 2 a better game because they have to step up their game even more so because they've kind of cornered the genre for about 8 years. And now if there is a competitive game, and Rivals, I've had fun playing it. I will say that. If you have a game that can kind of compete with them, they can not only draw inspiration from it, but they can also go and like step up their game, which is an important part. But I might do a whole separate video on that, on that subject.
It could. We're always looking at other games. You like how I just turned this into like a generic answer?
Yeah.
That's totally fine. I don't expect you to be always necessarily be able to answer this.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about a specific game, but yeah, well, we look at other games and we try to learn from other games, and like it'll be interesting to see how some of these other games, whether they change over time. Also, like.
Yeah.
I think there is like a pretty decent part of the gaming community, especially when you talk about the free-to-play community, that kind of jumps from game to game, And
I call this the hype cycle. And I talked about this earlier in the video, if you recall. Basically, in free-to-play games, there's hype cycles, where a new season comes out, players get excited, they play it, they either love it or they don't, and they go to the next free-to-play game. Nothing wrong with that. It means you're just constantly keeping yourself in a game that is like fun to you, and you get to kind of change it. And sometimes, like, not playing something for a couple weeks can be a good way to enjoy the game that you love again. And that's why I think when he talks about this, it goes to that hype cycles I've talked about, where your hype cycle needs to be really good. And Overwatch, with those filler seasons I referenced earlier, has made their hype cycles not as hype for people, so like not as many people return. So that's why it becomes important for them to understand that they need to make their hype cycles a little bit more exciting for people, and you could see a lot more players play Overwatch. Once again, back to what I said, give people a reason to play Overwatch. People want to. So
obviously this is take it with a pinch of salt. She'll bias SVB because he's got these guys on the call, but you guys are orders of magnitude more communicative than we ever had devs in, with the Overwatch one. I recognize devs as in you were in the team then too, Aaron, but nowadays you guys are way more communicative with us, and I think it really, really like helps us. Like it makes me feel better. I'm sure Flats feels better.
Yep.
When we know what you're doing, what you're thinking, where you're coming from, it makes it so much easier to understand you guys' perspective and to be more empathetic to like the problems you're trying to solve. Whereas, again, when it's a little bit in the dark, I think the community
it's a guessing game.
Antsy, and so I really, really appreciate you giving us your time, so much of your time, and being so open and candid and doing your best. I know you did your absolute best to answer everything you could, and I think you did an amazing job of actually giving us really helpful information, not just, dodging every question and giving us PR crap. So thank you guys. I really appreciate it a lot.
All right. Cheers.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you guys.
That was great.
Bye.
So just to kind of like respond to that, let me know what you think about the video. I thought that was a great interview. They touched on a lot of like really good subjects, and I felt like it was a good back and forth, and it didn't feel like they couldn't talk about a lot of stuff, which was really nice. Let me know what you think about how we did this. I know we're trying different approaches to how I do YouTube now. A lot more of like this off-stream type of react stuff, or like a new video we're going to be doing soon. So let me know. Feedback will help me a lot, so I can understand what you like, what you maybe didn't like about this, and I can continue to make better videos. So yeah, I hope you enjoy. Like the video, subscribe to the YouTube, leave a comment, give us feedback, all that. I hope you enjoyed. Hope you have an amazing day/night.